All right, greetings, folks. I'm Logan Therrien, the Chief Strategy Officer with CUI Solutions. With me, I have Eric Gifford, who is the consultant team manager, and then also Erica Croft, who is one of our lead consultants and providing great feedback and support to the CMMC ecosystem. And today, I'd like to discuss some misinformation I've recently seen from the environment on what CMMC and NIST 800-171 Rev 2, which is in effect now, is trying to accomplish. And specifically, we can go back to the CIA triad. And if you're unfamiliar with that CIA triad, it is the protection of the confidentiality, so making sure the information remains close to your heart, that you don't want people to identify or see what they shouldn't be seeing. And then integrity, right? So when you read the data, you want to make sure it's accurate and that it's in the original form that you expected it to be. And then availability, and that the information is continuously available to those who need it, right? And so, all three of those together provide a robust environment for a company to continue to have data when they need it that is accurate and again, in a confidential manner where the adversary or the folks that aren't supposed to see it don't have, right? And then we go to what the purpose of NIST 800-171 is for those non-federal systems. It is just for the confidentiality of that information, right? And so this was a decision that the DoD made to basically have a costs reduction benefit for the defense industry, right? Now, we already have other frameworks, and Erica's really knowledgeable about one of these, RMF, right, which is about that whole CIA triad. And when we get into maybe federal systems or, again, non-federal systems that has to protect information at a higher classification level, right, that's really important. Again, but this is controlled, unclassified information. And again, also the DO's risk analysis said, let's just protect the confidentiality. As long as those people don't have it, as a business decision, that organization or the organization seeking assessment or certification can decide how they want to make sure the data is available or that there's integrity there. However, there's contract requirements where if they don't have availability or integrity, they'll just have to deal with the outcome of that. However, as from the Department of Defense perspective, we just want to make sure that the folks don't have it that aren't supposed to have it, right? So, thoughts, Erica or Erica?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit on that. We do occasionally see some confusion, even aside from marketing materials that might go out from organizations now and then that are trying to pitch a backup solution as something that is, you've got to have a tool like this in order to be compliant with 800-171 and pass the assessment of that under the CMMC architecture. And to set the record straight on it, as Logan was saying, that the focus of 800-171 and what's verified through the CMMC process is the confidentiality factor of the CUI, that sensitive information. And there are some elements that are applicable to backups. Like if you are doing backups, that has to be protected. So under the current revision, either through physical security or through encryption. Encryption is largely considered the better way to do that. And if you remember a couple of years ago, the DoD did make the statement of encrypted CUI is still CUI, and that conversation came up specifically in the context of backups. So if you are backing up to the cloud, that's expected that's going to be a FedRAMP or FedRAMP Moderate equivalent cloud storage bucket for those backups, even if you're encrypting it before it goes there. But that protection of the backups is the focus of 800-171. Doing backups in the context of those requirements and what's assessed for CMMC does not require that you have backups. Now, I say that, and I'll conditionally make that statement and say that I would strongly advise you do backups and have a very good backup architecture and are properly validating that your backups are good. Backups are not any good if you haven't tested to make sure they have what you think they have. But strictly speaking, to 800-171 and the assessment objectives of 800-171A at Rev 2, which is what CMMC is built against, if somebody's reaching out and telling you, hey, the assessor is going to look at things, or that 80171 has a strong focus on availability and integrity. Not so much. There are some requirements in 871 focused on confidentiality that may have kind of an ancillary or kind of a side effect of getting you some level of integrity or availability, but that's not the focus. So if you have somebody that's trying to pitch you something like a specific solution for backups and making that pitch of, hey, if you don't have them, you're going to fail your assessment, just be wary of things like that. And again, do strongly advise have good backups, but don't be thinking the assessor is going to dig into the details of things like what's your backup schedule and how long do you retain them and so forth. It's more of a, if you have them, are you properly protecting them? Erica, you've probably seen some in conversation with clients too about some confusion over backups and what's expected in the context of 80171.
Yeah, and yeah, I will say that Logan gave me the ability to have the 853 door be open, so I'll open that door really shortly, but also clarify, right? We're talking CMMC 800-171, RMF and FISMA 853, and people will, people who know those two different things, but 171 is based off of 53. And the 53 component that we're talking about specifically is CP9, which is contingency planning, right? The theory that backups are supporting contingency operations makes sense for federal systems. They are supposed to be redundant. They are supposed to provide availability. So the basis of the 171 control, which for backups is 389, protect the confidentiality of the backup, which, by the way, is in media protection, right? MP. So the thought is that there probably is people that go, oh, at its root, we're talking about backups. So if the 171 is saying backups, you must do backups. No, the control 389 is specifically your backups have to be protected, i.e. encrypted. So if you are doing backups, encrypt them. That is the 171 requirement. Do not get distracted by its background, right, which is contingency operations. But to Eric's point, as a cybersecurity professional, I also recommend if you're doing, if you aren't doing backups, you probably should for at least your core infrastructure, right, or your architecture, because you want to be redundant. But don't let someone bully you into an idea that it has to be done for CMMC. If you do backups, they simply just must be encrypted.
Right, and so that's a good point. Having the ability to make an informed decision. This is why we're providing this information too, because there's a lot of marketing out there, and sometimes those marketing folks aren't in tune with what the actual requirements are. They just know what they're told, right? And so, as an assessor, and by the way, Erica is a very experienced consultant, but she's also a qualified CMMC certified assessor, right? So with experience providing assessments. And this is kind of going back to what the requirements I'm using. So we talked about NIST 800-171, which is a requirement under DFARS 252.204/7012. However, the assessment guide provided by the DoD CIO's office is still applicable because we've seen contracts with this DFARS 252.204/7021. However, again, it's an assessment guide and it's really a truthful information, right? Especially when it comes here. And so the backups, it talks about media protection 3.8.9. And again, what are the requirements that we're going to be looking at as assessors, right? Protect the confidentiality of backup CUI at storage locations. That's the requirement. And the assessment objective is the confidentiality of backup CUIs protected at storage locations. Now, Erica did mention encryption, and that as an example, and that's a great example. However, there are other means of doing it. And so again, we go back to the DoD took a risk opportunity, said here, just show us how you're going to do it, what's your plan, and then show us that you actually accomplish it according to your plan. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at as well, right? Are there physical means in which this is occurring? Is there encryption methods in which this is occurring? Again, encryption doesn't remove the data from scope. It just is a technical control to protect that data while it's in the scope, right? So that's what we're going to be taking a look at. This is pretty much the extent of the backups, right? Now there's other technical means if it's connected to the systems and stuff, but really this is what we're looking for. And again, it's the confidentiality of the backup. We're not looking for the availability of the backups or the integrity of the backups. The DoD says as an organization, you just figure that out yourself. Again, you have to meet contractual requirements. So if you can't do that, that's another issue, and you'll have another conversation about that. Right. So this is the resource that we're going to be using as assessors and as an organization, either doing a self-assessment or preparing for that assessment by DIPCAC or a third party. You should be utilizing this as well. These assessment objectives are the important parts. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, because again, we're talking about resources. What we've said, availability doesn't apply, integrity doesn't apply, if confidentiality does. How do we get there? Right. So the 32 CFR Part 2002, and this is where it's safeguarding, right? So this 32,002 CFR, let's go actually here. What is that, right? And that is Controlled Unclassified Information Program. It's run by the Information Security Oversight Office, and it's under the National Defense Code of Federal Regulations, which is 32 CFR, right? So if we go to the table of contents and we go to safeguarding, let's just scroll down a little bit and it'll take us to some pretty important things, right? This does talk about methods for you to use this for safeguarding, but information systems that process, store, transmit CUI are two different types. You got federal information systems, and then you have non-federal information systems right here, right? And so one important sentence out of there is that NIST SP 800-171 defines the requirements necessary to protect CUI Basic on non-federal information systems in accordance with the requirements of this part. Agencies must use NIST SP 800-171 when establishing security requirements to protect CUI's confidentiality on non-federal information systems, right? Unless the authorizing law, regulation, or government-wide policy listed in the CUI registry for that category or subcategory provides specific safeguarding. So that's when you get CUI specified, and now we're into different laws and Code of Federal Regulations, and those would be like NMPI, non-naval nuclear propulsion information, or export control, which are very much more specific, and again have a little extra authority sprinkled on top of that. So again, always understanding where the resource is. So how did I get here? You're telling me this, but how do I prove it to somebody? If I have to sit across from an assessor and I have a disagreement, but I know what the law says, but it's not what they're, how am I going to prove where am I going to stand on top of the mountain and show this is what I'm reading? What are you reading, kind sir? So, all right. Any additional thoughts, Erica?
No, just if anything like this comes up and you do have questions, if you're a subscriber to the KCD or the KRA, you do have the check-ins to kind of run something by us. But I guess overall, it's sometimes I recommend to clients, trust your gut. If you get something that's trying to sell you something, like a new product, and they're using CMMC assessment or the requirements of 800-171 as the reasoning. Sometimes they're on point, sometimes they're not. So just use your good judgment in making that determination of whether it's something that actually is part of the requirement. But otherwise, I don't know, Erica, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I reiterate the same sentiment for clients, OSCs. I know it's boring, but read the documentation, read NIST 800-171, and if you want to, bonus points, read the assessment guide. Because at the end of the day, the requirements are the requirements, and there is interpretation bias out there. So just please do yourself a favor and don't let, somebody else tell you something that you could easily read yourself, and understand that the words on the paper and the regulations that Logan brought up are what the rules are, and that should be the reality. So do your homework and be educated, because that'll do nothing but benefit you.
Yep. Do your homework and be educated. All right. Yep. Thanks, team. And look forward to getting more information out there in the future.